Paul McCartney had just finished a quiet breakfast in his London home when his assistant brought him a letter. It wasn't an ordinary letter. It had a thick black envelope, and on the front were 2 words, "For Paul." Inside, there was a single ticket and a short note, "Ozzy's final show. I'd like you to be there. Sharon." At first, Paul laughed. He never imagined himself at a Black Sabbath concert, especially not Ozzy Osbourne's final one. He admired Ozzy from afar, sure, but they came from such different worlds. Paul was the Beatles, peace, harmony, melody. Ozzy was Black Sabbath, darkness, chaos, power. And yet, something about the note struck Paul. Maybe it was the word, final. Maybe it was the handwriting. Maybe it was something deeper. Whatever it was, Paul said yes. He didn't tell the press. Didn't post about it. On the night of the concert, Paul McCartney quietly walked into the backstage area of Birmingham Arena, wearing a simple black coat and a hat pulled low. No one recognized him at first. But when Sharon Osbourne saw him, her eyes welled up with tears. "You came," she said softly. "I had to," Paul replied. "We started in the same place, didn't we?" That's when it hit Sharon, and later, everyone watching, that this wasn't just a rock concert. It was a full-circle moment. From the streets of Liverpool and Birmingham to the world's biggest stages, 2 legends were crossing paths one last time. But the real surprise came later, when Ozzy walked on stage and saw Paul standing in the wings. Ozzy freezes on stage. As the lights dimmed and the crowd roared, Ozzy Osbourne stood behind the curtain, holding onto a mic that suddenly felt too heavy. For a man who'd screamed into it thousands of times, this one felt different. His hand trembled, not from nerves, but from the weight of memory. He peeked past the curtain and saw something that nearly stopped his heart. Paul McCartney. Standing there. Watching. Smiling. Ozzy turned to Sharon. "You didn't." She nodded. "I did." Ozzy laughed and whispered, "Bloody hell." When he stepped out onto the stage, the crowd went wild. Flames burst into the air. Guitars roared. But for a moment, Ozzy just stood there, frozen. He looked out into the sea of faces, and then to the side, where Paul stood silently, clapping. "Before I start," Ozzy said into the mic, his voice cracking slightly, "there's someone here tonight who doesn't need an introduction. A Beatle. A legend. A mate." He turned and pointed. "Paul McCartney, everyone." The stadium exploded. Paul simply bowed his head, humble as ever. Ozzy continued, "We all started in the same dream. Music saved us. Music made us. And tonight, music is gonna say goodbye." Then he launched into War Pigs, and something electric passed through the arena. It wasn't just a song. It was a moment, a torch being passed, a life being remembered. Paul stood there, eyes closed, nodding to the rhythm. He didn't need to sing. He didn't need to speak. He just felt it. But what Paul didn't know was that Ozzy had one more surprise for him. And it was coming after the final song. Back to the beginning. As the show neared its end, Ozzy's voice grew more fragile. His body swayed, his breath shorter between words. But he pushed through. Every note was a goodbye. Every scream, a thank you. Then the lights dimmed again, and Ozzy spoke. "This next song," he said, "isn't a Sabbath song. It's not even mine. But it's the reason I picked up a mic. The reason I'm here. And the reason he's here." The stage went silent. Then, out of nowhere, a soft melody began. Paul's eyes widened. It was Yesterday. But not just the studio version. It was heavy. Slow. Haunting. With distorted guitars and a deep bass line. It was Ozzy's version of Paul's most famous ballad. He was paying tribute. And it broke Paul's heart, in the best way. As Ozzy sang, "Why she had to go, I don't know," she wouldn't say. The crowd went quiet. Phones dropped. No one cheered. Everyone just listened. Tears ran down Paul's face. When the song ended, Ozzy turned, nodded toward Paul, and said, "Back to the beginning, mate." The screen behind them lit up with old black and white photos, the Beatles in Hamburg. Black Sabbath in their first studio. 2 worlds, 1 passion, music. But the story didn't end there. Because after the final bow, Paul did something no one expected. The secret backstage moment. The concert ended. The lights dimmed for the last time. Ozzy gave a shaky wave to the roaring crowd, then disappeared into the shadows behind the stage. People screamed his name. Fans cried in their seats. Some stood in stunned silence, unable to believe it was over. But behind the stage curtain, something unforgettable was about to happen. Ozzy was sitting on a worn-out couch, drenched in sweat, breathing hard. His makeup was smudged, his black shirt stuck to his chest, but his eyes were glowing. That's when Paul walked in. No camera. No crew. Just the 2 of them. For the first few seconds, they said nothing. Then Ozzy grinned. "Well?" he asked. Paul smiled. You just sang yesterday like it came from the bottom of the earth. I've never heard anything like it. Ozzy chuckled. It did come from the bottom of the earth, Birmingham. They both laughed. Then Paul grew quiet. You know, he said, when we were starting out in Liverpool, we'd hear these whispers about a band down the road. Loud, angry, dark. We didn't understand it at the time, but now I get it. You weren't singing about love and peace. You were screaming about survival. Ozzy looked down, his smile fading a little. That's what Sabbath was, he said. We were 4 lost kids from factories and broken homes, trying to make sense of a world that didn't care. Music was the only thing louder than the noise in our heads. Paul nodded. It saved me too. In a different way. Ozzy suddenly turned serious. You being here tonight, it meant something, Paul. More than I can say. You're the reason I even believed music could take me somewhere. Then, in a rare and emotional moment, Ozzy reached under the table and pulled out a dusty old record. It was the Beatles' White Album. But not just any copy, it had Ozzy's name written on the inside cover in blue ink, from when he was a teenager. He handed it to Paul. I've carried this with me for 50 years, Ozzy said. Through every tour, every hotel room, every rehab. I want you to have it now. Paul took the record slowly, his eyes locked on the cover. For a man who had seen the world 100 times over, this was still overwhelming. You sure? Ozzy nodded. It's time. Paul clutched the album to his chest. I'll treasure it. They embraced. 2 giants of music, 2 old souls who had seen the rise and fall of everything. In that hug, there was no Beatles. No Sabbath. No fame. Just 2 boys from England, who had survived. But just before Paul left, Ozzy whispered one last thing. You know, Paul, people think this is my final show. But maybe it's just the end of one chapter. And with that, a new question was born, one that would shock the world.